Good morning, students. Yesterday we discussed the first approach to translation studies, and that was the linguistic approach, right? And as far as the linguistic approach is concerned, we studied that because linguistics in itself, the linguistic theory in itself is the study of what we call scientific study of language, where we study the structures, we study the grammar, we study the syntax, right? That is what we studied. So many theorists, they say that it is linguistic theory in itself is inadequate to be used by the translation theorist. Why? Because they say that linguists जो हैं वो किस पे focus करते हैं? They focus on the structure of language, because of which they say that the meaning that should be maintained in the TL text, translated text, that meaning somehow gets ignored. So that is the reason why linguistic approaches are kind of found deficient and inadequate by the theorist, right? Next, I move on to interdisciplinary approach, where you are using various disciplines, interdisciplinary. During the past many years, translation studies has developed into an independent discipline. We know that, right? We studied in the previous lecture itself that how translation started, how it came into existence in Rome in the 17th century, and how it became, what did they say? It became an independent subject of study in which century? In the 20th century, right? So, during the past many years, translation studies has developed into an independent discipline. It draws on diverse disciplines such as linguistics, cultural studies, sociology, psychology, philosophy, ethnology, etc. अब ethnology क्या होती है? Scientific study and comparison of human races. Ethnology, okay? Human races, study of human races, scientific study. It has been described as a house of many rooms, a house which has many rooms. The interdisciplinary approach or integrated approach to translation studies is useful. How? In bridging the gap between linguistic and literature oriented methods. ये first purpose है जो solve करता है क्या? Interdisciplinary approach. Second, evolving a model that is based on insights from other disciplines. There are 4 general areas of interest that define translation studies and provides a direction to it. The first 2 areas emphasize the functional aspect of the translated text in relation to the source language text. So 4 areas में से first 2 areas कहाँ focus करते हैं? Functional aspect of the translated texts, and the other 2 areas are related to the analysis of what goes on in the actual process of translation. And these 4 areas they have elaborated upon. And the first area is history of translation. The historical approach, interdisciplinary बोल रहे हैं ना, तो interdisciplinary में बहुत सारी approaches आएंगी. Basically, they will talk about 4 approaches. The historical approach puts the translation studies in perspective and provides useful hints for future course of action. It includes the examination of the theories of translation in the past, the critical responses to translations, the role and function of translation in a specific period or periods, the systematic growth of translation, and analysis of individual works of translation. So, on the basis of history, what is done? It includes the theories which are used in translation in the past, or उन जो थेरीज पास्ट में यूज करी उनका क्रिटिकल रिस्पॉन्स क्या था, दैट इज व्हाट दे टेक इनटू एक्शन, इनटू कंसिडरेशन, नॉट एक्शन. एंड द रोल एंड फंक्शन इन अ स्पेसिफिक पीरियड. जब हिस्ट्री की बात करते हैं तो पर्टिकुलर पीरियड्स की ही बात करते हैं हम, या एजेस बोल लो, है ना. सो ऑन दैट बेसिस दे स्टडी द सिस्टमैटिक ग्रोथ ऑफ ट्रांसलेशन. Second area is translation in the target language culture. Its focus is on analyzing the influence of a text, author, or genre on carrying the norms of the translated text into the TL system. It examines how and why the particular principles of selection operate within the TL system. So, on these basis, cultural translation, language culture is studied. Next is translation and linguistics. This area of interest within interdisciplinary approach has always proved to be useful. It has been useful. Its focus remains on the arrangement of linguistic elements between the source language and obviously the target language at all levels, from phonemic to syntactic. Syntax और phonemes अब आपको समझ आ गए. लास्ट लेक्चर में हमने उनके बारे में बात करी है. सिंटेक्स होता है अरेंजमेंट ऑफ वर्ड्स इनटू मीनिंगफुल सेंटेंसेस, एंड फोनीम्स या फोनेटिक्स हैं हाउ द वर्ड्स आर pronounced, their basic pronunciation, right? It is also concerned with these issues. Linguistic equivalences. Equivalence क्या बताया था मैंने आपको? Equivalences getting closer to what? Original. Machine translation and problems of non-literary text. And last area covers the whole domain of literary translation. Sorry. It deals with particular problems of translating poetry, drama, fiction, etc. It also deals with the problems of preparing theatre texts or dubbing or subtitling for the cinema. So ये translation and poetics में आता है. It also grapples with the poetics of individual translators, comparisons between them, interrelationship between the SL and the TL text, etc. As translation studies is concerned with multiple disciplines, languages and cultures, and aims at cross-cultural communication, a comprehensive interdisciplinary approach is required for its systematic study. So what it is focusing on? जब हम interdisciplinary approaches की बात करते हैं तो there is history of translation, there is target language culture, there is translation and linguistics, and there is translation and poetics. And how is the writer concluding? He says that a comprehensive होता है पूरा एक detail. There is a need for comprehensive interdisciplinary approach is required to systematically study what? To systematically study the theory of translation. Okay? And next approach is cultural approach. तो linguistics हो गई. Linguistics में उसने उसको inadequate बोला. In literature, linguistics approach is inadequate because it focuses on structure. It doesn't focus much on meaning. Interdisciplinary approach, we will not say that it is inadequate or inefficient, but there is a need for a comprehensive systematic study as far as interdisciplinary approaches are concerned. You have to keep in mind this. And last and the interesting part is the cultural approach. During the 1980s, linguistically oriented approaches were criticized for being too rigid when things don't tend to change, and mechanical. The focus turned away from the study of linguistics to that of cultures, and culturally oriented models began to be evolved. In the domain of translation studies too, the critics began to emphasize the cultural aspects involved in the process of translation. और cultural approach से related सबसे important theorist जो हैं वो हैं स्नेल हॉर्नबाय. नाम याद रखना है आपको, स्नेल हॉर्नबाय. Described translation as a cross cultural event. तो यहीं से समझ आ जाता है ना. So what they called it, cross cultural event. It is significant to know the interrelationship between language and culture. It is true that no language can exist without a cultural context, though it is equally true that no culture can do without a natural language at its center. So remember this, that culture on one hand and language on one hand, they are interconnected. You cannot separate them. For a language cannot exist without culture, and no culture can exist without a natural language. ये पेज नंबर 41 का थर्ड पैराग्राफ है. डू रिमेंबर दिस प्लीज. ठीक है. Thus, translation is concerned with both the language and its culture rather with the two languages, that is the SL and the TL, and the two related cultures. Transferring meaning, trying to understand the meaning from SL to the TL is the only part of the translation process. The cultural aspect and other relevant aspects are also part of that process. Okay, remember this thing. What is he saying? No doubt meaning change हो रहा है. कहाँ change हो रहा है? From SL text to the TL text. But what we have to keep in mind, the cultural aspect of both is very, very significant. Only then you will have a successful TL text. Suzanne Basnet's opinion is in the context of cultural approach is very significant. What she says, the translator must tackle the SL text in such a way that the TL version will correspond to the SL version. To attempt to impose the value system of the SL culture into TL culture is dangerous ground. Basnet warns against imposition of foreign culture of the SL onto the culture-oriented value system of the target language. If a translator is insensitive in the matter, there will be a genuine reaction against his translated text. If the cultural aspects of SL are totally ignored in the TL, then obviously it will affect the readers. The translator has to make appropriate decisions to make his translated text correspond to the source text in both the language and culture areas. No hard and fast rules can be framed in this matter. The problem of the translator are bound to multiply if there is a wide cultural and linguistic gap between the SL and the TL. It is important to note that translation of some culture-based words and syntax from one language into another language is problematic. So, we can take a few examples from familiar Indian context to elaborate the point. बड़े अच्छे points लिए अब उससे आपको cultural वाला point जो है ना, cultural approach, how the things are, how they are inseparable things. How things मतलब कि आप language को culture के बिना exist नहीं करवा सकते. There is no language without culture and there is no culture without a natural language. So what are the examples? See, there are many words of food in Indian languages such as barfi, laddu, kanji, sukua, which is dry fish, pakhal, watered rice, and so on and so forth. Okay, such words remain unintelligible to a native reader the TL text. The best way for the translator, क्या पॉसिबल वे है ट्रांसलेटर के लिए कल्चरल कॉन्टेक्स्ट उसका ना ख़त्म करे, कल्चरल एस्पेक्ट उसका ना ख़त्म करे, टू यूज़ द वर्ड एज इट इज़. मैंने पहले भी आपको शायद आई का एग्जाम्पल दिया था, जो कि हमारे यहाँ मराठी में स्टोरी है. उन्होंने आई, मदर के लिए आई बोलते हैं, तो उन्होंने उसको चेंज नहीं किया. Keeping in view the cultural aspect, they used it as it is. Similarly, they say that if we are using the words, the names of the Hindi food items, sweets, it is better for the writer to use them as it is. Okay? Leaving his reader to find out the meaning from a TL source. Or he may provide explanatory notes. ठीक है, नीचे notes दे दो explanatory notes की क्या होते हैं. Even the writer of an original text uses words belonging to a different culture from the culture of his target audience, such as without attempting to translate them literally. तो कुछ translators without any hitch they use the words as it is. The use of Greek, Roman, Latin, French words in English text, we have seen that. For instance, is a case in point. अगर उनका एग्जाम्पल ले हम, जो ग्रीक के वर्ड्स, इंग्लिश, रोमन के वर्ड्स हैं, या लैटिन और फ्रेंच के कुछ वर्ड्स हैं जो एज इट इज़ यूज़ किए जाते हैं. In our times, T.S. Eliot uses many culture-oriented words from many different languages in his poem, The Wasteland. The Wasteland is a great poem by T.S. Eliot with a huge depth, and then you will find in this I don't know what details they have focused on, but he's saying about the same thing. संस्कृत के कुछ ऐसे words T.S. Eliot ने use किए हैं यहाँ, which he has not translated. जैसे कि देखो, he has provided detailed explanatory notes at the end of his poem. For example, his poem ends on important Sanskrit words: Dat, Dayadhvam, Damyata, Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. So, he has used these Sanskrit words in his English poem as it is. Then, in English, words like student, teacher, doctor, worker, engineer show no gender distinction as in the Indian language Uriya. Simple sentences using such words in English: my workers are on strike, my teacher is on leave, our students need your help, will remain unintelligible in Uriya translation. Take another problem for the translator. In Hindi, we have 3 words for you. In English, tu to a second person with whom we intimate, tune to the second person with whom we have a formal relationship, and aap to the second person whom we respect. Thus, an English translation of these words will be inadequate. It will not be possible to translate these words. So cultural approach mein, what is the writer trying to tell you? The writer is saying that in order to maintain the cultural aspects of the TL text and to maintain its original context of the SL into the TL text, what we should do, some words which you think, the translator think, will lose meaning when translated should be used as it is without any change. Use the same words that are given in the SL text. Okay, this is what he's saying. There are certain examples more which he has given here, which you can go through. Abuses का और एग्जाम्पल दिया उन्होंने. Abuses are typically cultural oriented. ये मैंने आपको मित्रो मरजानी का भी बताया था, है ना, कि साउथ इंडियन हैज़ ट्रांसलेटेड इट. तो उसने मित्रो मरजानी में जो गालियाँ हैं वो कैसे ट्रांसलेट करी होंगी पंजाबी की गालियाँ into his South Indian version. And most of them are untranslatable, so they can't be translated. In literal translation, they become meaningless and absurd. Value खत्म हो जाती है, meaning खत्म हो जाता है उनका. That is why Mulk Raj Anand's literal translation of Punjabi swear words like rape mother, rape sister, child of a pig seem ludicrous in English. अच्छे नहीं लगते हैं सुनने में when such translations are done. ये abuses का example लेके they are trying to make point clear to you. Then there are some words which have different cultural contexts and connotations. For example, the word incest in the context of person marrying his or her cousin is right in the coastal districts of Orissa, but wrong in the southern districts of Orissa and in South India, where marriage with one's cousin is normal. Even in North India, it is something which is not normal, right? The problem of the translator is to be fully aware of the cultural differences between the SL and the TL. For instance, in England, America or Europe, it is okay if a young man speaks in a casual way to his father. Hi dad, how you doing? In India, a young man will have to use honorific forms in same situation. A literal translation in this type of situation will offend sensitivities of the readers. For instance, in Hindi we say Gandhi ji, while in English we say Mr. Gandhi. ये फर्क है ना? Gandhi ji in English will sound artificial, even ridiculous, while Mr. Gandhi in Hindi will sound offensive. ये फर्क है दोनों लैंग्वेजेस में और कल्चर में भी. जब हम गांधी जी बोलते हैं तो वो रिस्पेक्टफुल है, लेकिन हिंदी में अगर हम बोलेंगे मिस्टर गांधी तो इट इज़ लाइक यू आर मेंशनिंग टू कॉमन मिस्टर गांधी बट यू आर नॉट मेंशनिंग टू द महात्मा गांधी. ये फर्क है, ठीक है. The translator has to ensure that his translated text does not hurt the sentiments of the TL speakers. Clear? Thus, a cultural approach to translation studies has its own importance. As a critic, we must judge a translated text by following norms of this approach. Norms are the rules, though we need not to be strict or rigid in doing so. So what are we learning from cultural approach? That in order to maintain the cultural aspect of the SL text, we need to use some words which cannot be translated. For example, words which are spoken out of respect. Words like Indian sweets, Indian food items, and how you address your elders or abuses, they are certain examples which cannot be translated. So what is being done? They are used as it is. ठीक है, ये है आपकी cultural approach to translation. As a translator, when we use cultural approach, what we should keep in mind? To be fully conversant with the culture context of the SL text and that of the language in which we are changing the text, that is the TL text. Next, to strike a balance between domestication, that is making the books accessible to new readers, which may involve the loss of information from the source text, and foreignization, keeping the foreignness and differences intact, which may puzzle the new reader. अब ये जो अप्रोचेस टू ट्रांसलेशन है ना, ये तो आपको बता रहे हैं कि ट्रांसलेटर क्या यूज़ कर सकता है, ट्रांसलेशन थ्योरी किन किन चीज़ों पे, किन किन अप्रोचेस पे बेस्ड है. बट इवेंचुअली व्हाट the writer wants to tell you is there are two terms, domestication and foreignization, with which this chapter also concludes. They are two important aspects as far as translation is concerned, right? और कल्चरल अप्रोच के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में द राइटर इज सेइंग दैट यू हैव टू स्ट्राइक अ बैलेंस, कीप अ बैलेंस बिटवीन दिस. फॉरेनाइजेशन इज सिंपली आप जो वर्ड्स हैं जिन्हें नहीं चेंज कर सकते एंड जिन्हें ट्रांसलेट नहीं कर सकते, आप उन्हें एज इट इज़ यूज़ कर रहे हो. दैट इज़ what it means by saying keeping the foreignness. And domestication, making the book accessible to readers, which may involve the loss of information from the source text. Okay, so we will deal in detail with domestication and foreignization. Next चीज़ जो ट्रांसलेटर को अपने माइंड में रखनी है while using cultural approach for translation is not to take many liberties with the original text during the process of translation and to interact with the author of SL text in case of materials which cannot be translated. All right, so these are your three approaches, linguistic approach, interdisciplinary approach and cultural approach. How they are used by the translators, how the translation theory is used by making use of these approaches, how let us say the SL text is translated into TL text. Keeping in view these approaches is what you have to keep in mind, and which approaches are adequate, which approaches are inadequate. And as far as the cultural approach, which is the most significant approach, is concerned, what we have learned that keeping intact some words as it is from the SL text in the TL text is the best way, right? And what should the translator of the TL text do? The one who is translating, the translator, what he should do? He can give explanatory notes. Okay, that is how things can be maintained. That is how the cultural aspect of a particular work can be maintained, right? So I hope these three approaches are quite clear to you. I keep on repeating ताकि बातें आपके जहन में, आपके दिमाग में बैठ जाएं, आपको समझ आ जाएं that what basically the writer is trying to tell you, or what are the three approaches, what are their groundings, what are their tendencies, how successful they are, is the most important aspect as far as these approaches are concerned. Okay, so this is all for today. We continue tomorrow by discussing the main aspects of this chapter, that is domestication and foreignization. ठीक है? कोई query होगी, कोई doubt होगा, you're most welcome. Thank you.